Have you been feeling sad on your growth journey lately? If so, stay tuned and I will teach you how to grieve and let go of the old you. What is going on, everyone? We are back for another episode of Prospering with Christ. I hope that you had a wonderful week last week, and I hope that this week will be just as amazing to you as well. So, for today's episode, we are discussing how to release your former self. I wanted to talk about this because in a Christian community, we understand that when we make the decision to give our life to Christ, that God is going to transform us and he's going to make us into a new person. We quote Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 26 through 27 all the time. And for those of you who don't know, it says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. We understand that God is going to transform us, but what we don't understand is the process of that transformation. The only way that you can become the person that God wants you to become is by releasing your former self. And the reason why God has not been able to transform you is because we understand that a transformation needs to happen, but we don't understand the process of transformation. See, we think all we're going to do is give our life to Christ, and then we're going to wake up one day and we're going to be transformed. We're going to have a new mindset. We're going to think differently. We're going to act differently. We're going to burn for God differently. We're going to have new habits. We're just going to wake up one day and God will have magically transformed us. But that is not how transformation works. God has to take you through the process. And the reason why God has been struggling to give you a new heart, the reason why God has been struggling to grow you is because you keep avoiding the process. See, the process involves God ripping some things off of you. And when he rips those things off of you, it's going to bring out some negative emotions. And one thing that I know about a lot of us is that we do not like feeling anything negative. We do not like feeling sad, hurt, angry. And every time those types of emotions arise in us, we will rather run from it. We will rather do things to cope with it. We will rather distract ourselves. We will do everything but push through, accept it, deal with it, and get to the other side. The reason why God has not been able to transform you is because you keep running when things get hard. You keep running when things aren't going right. You keep running when you feel uncomfortable. You keep running when negative emotions are arising out of you. And God is saying, these emotions is just for a season, and you keep prolonging the season every time you avoid them. You keep prolonging the season every time you do things to distract yourself. You keep prolonging the season every time you do anything but push through. You've been wondering why you've been stuck here. You've been wondering why you haven't seen any growth. And God is saying because you are not working with him. You are not partnering with him. You are not doing the things necessary for him to transform you. And you have to get out of the mentality also of avoiding your emotions because you feel bad for having them. You feel bad for being sad over getting rid of a sin. You feel bad because you miss operating in that habit. And God is saying, I am not angry at you for missing those negative things. I am not angry at you for being sad about losing that part of you. It was your identity. And guess what? Missing it and being sad is a part of grieving, but you have to go through the grieving process. You can't keep coping with negative things. You can't keep running from your problems. You have to push through. And you have to go through it so that God can fully transform you. And as you go through this process of releasing your former self, you have to be prepared to regret even taking the process. The reason why is because this process is not going to be pretty. There is nothing pretty about dealing with your trauma. There is nothing pretty about growth. There is nothing pretty about healing. I understand on social media, people always want to make it a trend and they always want to talk about how they're on their healing journey, and they make it seem like it's an aesthetic and that is beautiful and it's a beautiful process. But in reality, dealing with the things that hurt you, dealing with the things that's not good for you, trying to transform and become better, going through the battle of wanting to stay in negative things, but wanting to do better at the same time. Nothing about that is pretty. You're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel negative emotions, and you are going to have moments where you question, why did I even do this? This hurts too bad. Sometimes you're not going to see the fruits of your works immediately. You are going to have moments where you feel like you are trying and trying and trying to become better, but you're not seeing those better moments come to pass yet. You are going to have moments where you feel like this is hurting too bad and there's nothing at the other side. You can't see that better version of you. You can't see the life that God promised you. You can't see the plans that God said He had for you. And you are going to feel like you're wasting your time. You are going to feel like you went through this pain for nothing. You are going to feel like this hurts too bad. You are going to regret being on this journey. Sometimes you're going to feel like things were better for you when you were that old version of you, when you weren't dealing with your trauma, when you weren't trying to transform your mindset, when you weren't growing with God. You might feel like your situation was better. You might feel like your life was better. You might feel like you were more happy. And that is going to make you tempted to turn around and go back to the old version of you. That is going to make you tempted to hold on to the things that God is telling you to release. But I want to remind you that the parts of you that God is asking you to release, the person that God is trying to have you let go of, you were not in a better situation when you were operating as him or as her. You were not in a better situation when you had those negative habits. You were just silently hurting. You were using other things to cope. You were using other things to distract you so that you didn't even realize how bad you were hurting from who you were, how bad you were hurting from all the negative habits, sins, mindsets, experiences that you had in your past. And God is saying, you silently hurting is a life that's not good for you. You silently hurting and running from your problems is not his best for you. He wants you to go through this process. He wants you to feel the pain, because after the pain, there is a beautiful blessing. After the pain, there is a beautiful transformation. And it may hurt now, but when you look back in the end, you will realize that everything you went through, this whole process that you've experienced, it was all worth it. And the transformation was more beautiful than you could ever even imagine. And you want to know another reason why you might regret going through this process and releasing your former self? Is because maybe you are witnessing things working and things happening for people who didn't go through this process, who didn't do things God's way. Maybe they still have trauma. Maybe they still have negative mindsets. Maybe they're not a good person. Maybe they sin, and you see things happening for them, but you're doing things God's way. You're being obedient to Him. You're dealing with every single part of you that He tells you to deal with. The things that you see other people doing, God rebukes you. God convicts you every time you try to do it. They openly lie, but when you try and lie, you feel convicted. They openly fornicate, but when you try and fornicate, you feel convicted. And you feel like, I'm doing what you told me to do. I'm trying to live for you. I'm trying to transform for you, and you're not doing anything for me. I'm not seeing the fruits of my works. But these people don't care about you. These people aren't trying to live for you, and you keep blessing them and things keep working for them. And maybe seeing this is going to make you tempted to stop doing what God told you to do, to start operating in the things that God is telling you to release, because you feel like maybe God's way won't work. But I want to remind you that people only show you what they want you to see. Yes, they might have success. Yes, They might be doing the things that you're praying to do, but behind closed doors, they are miserable. Behind closed doors, they are suicidal. Behind closed doors, they are drinking every night to cope. They are doing drugs every night to cope. They are fornicating to hide from their trauma. They are operating in all these things because they are silently hurting. And God is saying, you are viewing things from the wrong perspective. See, the whole reason why I want you to transform is because I said that I saw you silently hurting, and I felt like that was not good enough for you. When I give you the things that you're asking me for, I want you to be happy. I don't want you to be hiding from things. I don't want you to be stuck in old ways. I don't want you to be doing things and attached to things that's not good for you. I want you to be the best version of you while you are living out this blessing. And I'm using these people to show you what it looks like to have it all, what it looks like to have that blessing and still be hurting and still be unsatisfied and still be miserable. But you're just focused on one part. You're focused on the blessing, but you're not focused on the person. God is saying, I look at the overall picture, and that is why I say that my ways are not your ways. My plans are not your plans, because you're focused on what they have and you really think you want that. God loves you so much that he's protecting you from what you think you want, because he knows that if he gives you what you say, if you're looking at these people and you're saying, I want to be like them, he knows, because he sees the real. He sees what you don't see. He sees what goes down behind closed doors. You don't want what you think you want. And he's protecting you and saying, stop focusing on what you see me doing for other people. Stop focusing on what you see that other people have and focus on what I'm doing for you. It may look like a punishment, but it's for your good. Everything that your parent does, everything that people do for you may not feel good, but it is always for your good. Are you enjoying this episode so far? Is this episode teaching you how to release your former self? If so, then I want you to do me two favors. Favor number one, I want you to leave a review. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this episode. Leave an honest review and let me and others know how you are enjoying the show. And favor number two, if you know anyone who struggles with releasing their former self, maybe God is trying to transform them, but they're still holding on to versions of them that's not good for them, then I want you to send this episode to them. Let this episode motivate and encourage them the same way that it is motivating and encouraging you. Now let's get back to the show. I understand that this process isn't easy. It's not easy to make the decision to push past these uncomfortable feelings, to trust God when it looks like things isn't working, when it looks like you're going through this for no reason, when it looks like people are winning and you are losing. And most importantly, I understand that one of the reasons why you want to turn back, one of the reasons why you struggle to overcome this season is because you feel lost. See, this is the part of transformation that people don't talk about. In order for God to make you new, he has to give you a new identity. And before he can give you that new identity, he has to strip your old identity away from you. Things that you're used to, things that you've been operating in your entire life, things that you were taught by your parents, things that you were raised up in, things that your environment told you. He has to strip who you are to make you into a new person. And that requires you to go through a season without an identity, a season where you feel lost. And maybe in that season, because it hurts so bad, because you're dealing with so much, because so much is changing before your eyes, it may be hard for you to discern God, and you feel like God has abandoned you. You feel like you're crying out to him. You feel like you're in the middle of the wilderness and you are begging God to say something. You are begging God to let you feel his presence, and you feel nothing. And in this season, you feel lost. And while you feel lost, it's so tempting to turn back, It's so tempting to do things to cope, to do things to distract yourself, to do things that don't make you feel lonely anymore, to do things that make you feel comfortable again, to do things that make you feel at peace because right now you're scared. Right now you feel abandoned. Right now you feel hurt. Right now you feel broken. But I said this in a previous episode, and I want to say it again. God has to break you in order to rebuild you up. How can he rebuild something that's already built? Sometimes he has to break you down. He has to let the pieces fall. He has to look on the ground and say, this piece needs to go back in her, or this piece needs to go back in him. But guess what? I'm not going to put it in the same place. I'm going to put it in a different place because it has a new function. I'm going to put it in a different place because it has a different purpose. I'm going to leave this piece on the ground because that wasn't a good thing. That was holding her back. That was keeping her stuck. I have to break you down in order to rebuild you up. You have to go through a season of feeling broken because you feeling broken is the only way that God can come in and rebuild. It is the only way that God can come in and renovate. It is the only way that God can come in and do the construction that he needs to do to transform you inside. And when he does it, he gets the glory. You don't get to say that you transform yourself. You don't get to say that somebody else transformed you. He gets the glory. You have no choice but to say it was nobody but God. You get to be living proof to everybody. There are people who are in your life and they know the old you. They know the sins you struggled with. They know the mindset you had. They know the habits you had. They know your failures. They know your mistakes. They know you. And when they see this new version of you, they are going to look to you and they're going to say, how did you grow? Maybe they never even thought you would have grown. Maybe they are amazed and they are shocked and they just want to know how it happened. You have no choice but to say it was nobody but God. Your transformation, your brokenness is going to bring glory to God's name. And for that reason, you are going to have to create new habits when you feel lost. You are going to have to get out of the habit of running back to the things that God is telling you to release. You are going to have to get out of the habit of doing things like drinking and fornicating and going to the club to cope and distract yourself from the things that God is telling you to release. You are going to have to stop running to these negative things and you are going to have to start running to God. And it's time for you to run to God and release your former self. And the first thing that you have to do is you have to learn how to mourn. Like I said, it is okay to feel sad. It is okay to feel angry. It is okay to miss the things that you used to do. Maybe God is calling you to stop clubbing and you miss going to the club. Maybe God is calling you to stop sleeping around and you miss sleeping around. Maybe God is calling you to stop gossiping and you miss calling your friends and talking about people. It is okay to feel sad. It is okay to miss these things. It is a part of the mourning process. And God is saying you have to mourn the old, because this habit is dying. This habit is getting buried. And just like when a person passes away and you have to go through the process of grieving, you also have to go through the process of grieving this emotion, of grieving this habit, of grieving this mindset, of grieving this old version of you. God is calling you to transform, which means that the version of you that you are currently right now is about to get buried. The version of you that you are currently right now is about to go away and it is not coming back. And you are going to have to go through the process of mourning and grieving and letting those emotions out on how you feel about this person, this identity that you had, this person and this version of you that you've known your entire life getting released from you. The first step that you have to take to release is to mourn it, accept it, and start the process of grieving. The next thing that you want to do is you want to seek God for the rebirth. The whole reason why this version of you is dying is because God has a better version in store for you. And so if you want to make it easier on yourself to release that old habit and, do better, or release that old mindset and do better, then you have to seek God and ask him for the rebirth. God, I understand that you told me to release this, but what should I replace it with? God, I understand that you told me to stop gossiping, but what should I replace gossiping with? And maybe he will tell you something like, instead of gossiping about them, pray about them. So now every time you feel tempted to gossip, you look at their situation and you go into prayer. That is a part of the rebirth. That is a part of taking the steps to become the new person that God is calling you to. Seek God and ask him for the rebirth. Seek God and ask him, what do I replace these negative things with? What do I replace these old habits with, or these old mindsets with? What do you want me to do differently in this area of my life? Have you ever dreamed of making your voice heard and sharing your message with the world? Well, it's time to turn that dream into a reality by starting your very own podcast. I understand that many aspiring podcasters are held back by the worries of cost, complexity, and the time it takes to launch a podcast. That is why I'm excited to announce my new training program that has all the tools and knowledge you need to launch your very own podcast for free. My training will guide you through every single step of your podcast journey. You will learn how to plan, release, market, and grow your podcast from start to finish. So if you're ready to take a leap of faith and share your message with the world, click the link in the description below to access my new podcast training. Now let's get back to the show. And the last thing that you can do is you can fully release your old self. Get out a piece of paper and write a letter to that version of yourself. Tell yourself how you feel about her or how you feel about him. Write the letter. Let out the emotions as you're writing. If you feel the need to cry, cry. If you feel the need to scream, scream. But write a letter to the old version of you. And after you're done writing the letter, find a way to release it. Whether you bury it, you throw it in the trash, or you burn it. That is your way of releasing how you feel about that version of you. But no matter what, you have to go through the process. And it may be hard. You may feel tempted to turn back because you feel like your faith is not working. You feel like things were better when you were operating as the old version of you. You feel like you see other people winning even though they're not doing the same things and they're not going through the same process. Or maybe it's because you feel lost. But no matter what's tempting you, you have to keep your eye on God and continue to go through the process. Mourn and grieve the old version of you. Ask God for the rebirth and how you can replace the things that he's telling you to release, and fully release by writing a goodbye letter to that version of you and letting it go by either burying it, throwing it in the trash, or burning it. So my action step for you today is I want you to ask God, what parts of you does he want you to release? I want you to take some time to actually grieve and mourn those areas and write a letter to that version of you and let it go. But that is all that I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe so that you get a notification every time a new episode is released. Also, leave a review and let me and others know how you are enjoying the show. And if you want to stay connected to me, make sure that you follow me on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook at Prospering with Christ. But that is all that I have for you today, and I will see you next week.